we may have people coming in over the next few minutes, and I think that's fine. I welcome all comers, of course. So let me share my screen. And actually make it show what I wanted to show. So everybody hear me okay? Making sure that. Okay, good. So welcome everybody. Really excited to kick off the call today. We're happy to have Suzanne Wakeham from Butte Glen Community College joining us today to talk about universal design and equity in your courses using open educational practices. If I can, no, I jumped. There we go. So this is one of a series of webinars that normally I am just the attendee of. I just got to pinch hit and introduce this one today, which I'm excited about. But I am really excited by all of these webinars. They've been great so far. So there are a whole sequence of them. You're welcome to join us for any and all. All are being recorded, and you can catch up with the ones you've missed, as well as sign up for new ones. This is a joint presentation series between the State University System of New York and the Open Education Consortium. And so I'm Alexis Clifton. I am with the SUNY OER Services. So our lovely system here for you, just a couple of colleges spread around the state. About half of them are community colleges and the rest are four-year schools and universities. But today we're going to step outside of our state over to the other coast and have Suzanne talk about what's going on in California. With that, I toss the ball to you, Una. Oh, no, wait. I'm sorry. One more slide. I forgot. I'm sorry. I'm losing track of things. You can talk about this one if you want, but I should say that so the SUNY side of the webinar series is coming out of this FACT2 Council, the Faculty Advisory Council on Teaching and Technology, which is an advisory council to the system provost's office. So it's a group that tends to examine closely many up-and-coming trends in education and technology and how they might potentially impact SUNY students. So one of the task forces that I'm actually a member of, but I can't take any credit for the webinar series except for, like I said, being a big fan, is on open pedagogy this year and next year. So part of that work coming out of that council is this webinar series. And now I will turn it over to you, Una.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexis. This is Una Daly from the community colleges at the Open Education Consortium. And yes, we were thrilled to work with that faculty committee on the Open Pedagogy series. And I've actually attended, I think, 3 out of the 5 that have been offered so far, and they have been really excellent. For those of you who don't know, the Open Education Consortium is the leading global organization working on open education throughout the world in 44 countries. We have over 240 members, and I have to say a fair number of those are community colleges in the US and Canada. So that's exciting too. And our speaker this morning is Suzanne Wakeham, which I have the pleasure of introducing. I don't think we have a separate slide for her, but let me tell you about, thank you. There we go. And I did say Happy Open Education Week, right? Or maybe I forgot to say that, but one of the many activities and events that we organize throughout the year is Open Education Week at the Open Ed Consortium. And so we're just thrilled to participate in this with SUNY. We also have a series of our own events as well. And enough about that. And on to Suzanne Wakeham, who I have known now for, I'm going to say probably about 4 years. No, I've known her since 2010 or 11, but I've worked with her more closely in California. Whoops. Did we lose our audio? Or can you still
hear you?
Oh. Okay, wonderful. So Suzanne is, she's biology faculty at Butte Community College, but she's also the coordinator for 3 specific areas: OER, of course, distance education and student learning outcome. She's developed over a dozen biology courses, including 5 online, and she's helped write numerous textbooks and learning ancillaries, including Nature, Discovery, and Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative and OpenStax. And she's presented on many topics around learning and open pedagogy. And I've had the pleasure of co-presenting with her several times. So you're in for a treat this morning, and I will turn it over to Suzanne.
All right, thank you, Una. Just checking that everyone can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so, and you can see my screen, correct? All right, onward then. I want to begin with this slide because I just love those internet games that, I don't know if you've ever played them, but what kind of dog breed matches your personality, or what kind of cookie are you, right? All these internet approaches to identifying who we are as individuals. And this tends to, I think, speak to a lot of people because we are individuals and we like to have that be recognized. And it's the same for our students. All of our students are individual. There's no average or typical student, I think, even though that's kind of how our educational system is designed. So I want to share a quick story from a book called The End of Average by Todd Rose, which is a really wonderful book about the history of our educational system. Makes a few odd conclusions towards the end, but for the most part, a really fabulous book. And one of the stories that he tells in this is having to do with fighter pilots in World War I. So this is way back in the early days of airplanes, and what they were doing at the time is when they designed the cockpits, they took all of the pilots, they measured them, you know, their height, their arm length, their leg length, and they took an average and they built the cockpit for that size. And what they were finding is no pilot actually fit in that cockpit well, and they were having lots of crashes and deaths and things, and so this was a problem. So they hired someone at the time to look at it. And what this person realized is all they really needed to do is make it so the chairs could slide back and forth. You could adjust the levers and things. And so that little bit of adjustment, recognizing that an average size pilot's seat won't work for anybody, it really helped them, but it also became why we have adjustable seats in our cars. Right? And so if you think of something just that simple, the ability to adjust all of these pieces makes our ability to drive so much more effective. And that's really the heart of universal design. It's recognizing that there needs to be a little bit of adjustment for various students. So universal design for learning is centered around 3 main ideas. The first one here is providing students multiple means of representation, meaning giving them different ways to learn the material. The next one is provide multiple means of action and expression, which means giving them different ways to show you that they've learned the materials, different types of assessments. And then multiple means of engagement is all about giving students different entry points into the content. So giving them the opportunity to connect it to things that they find interesting. So the idea behind universal design is allowing students to learn the material in a way that suits them, show that they've learned the material in a way that suits them, and connecting it in a way that connects to their interests. When I present this, the first question I get from folks is usually, that sounds like madness, just utter chaos. And what I'm going to present here is really how that can be streamlined so it's not chaotic. And I've done this for a number of years, and it's not as chaotic as it sounds. The other question I get is about content and rigor. So does this mean students just learn whatever they want and we have no control? And no, it doesn't. So this image is really, I think, the best explanation of what I'm talking about, is we're starting together and we're getting students all to the same endpoint. So we're not changing content or rigor. The only thing that we're changing is giving students choices in how they get there. That's what we're really talking about here. And I should mention, as I go through this presentation, if you want to type questions in the chat, Alexis will let me know when there's a question and I will answer it. I'm doing this fairly informal, so don't be afraid to ask questions. All right, so let's start with multiple means of representation. Most of us have a textbook for our class, and the textbook has, some very nice explanation in paragraph form and usually some nice images. And as Una mentioned, I teach biology, so all of my examples are going to be biology focused, but I think this applies really to any discipline. So our textbooks usually have paragraph and image, but for a lot of students that's not necessarily the best way to learn. For me personally, I like bulleted lists. It's hard for me to follow these long paragraphs. So when I was a student, what I do is I take that information and make a bulleted list. And so one thing that we can do for our students is provide examples of bulleted lists and help them see that they can also build them. So kind of scaffolding, first providing them some resources and then helping them build their own for students that prefer that format. Other students really prefer interactive formats. So you can't tell because this is just a screenshot, but this is a website where students can build their own DNA strand and click and drag amino acids to build a protein. And it gives them feedback and explains the process. So this interactive is a really great way to learn for some students. And then of course, with the internet today, there's so many great videos. And I know at least for my field, this was really a game changer because I can explain DNA or protein synthesis, but it's so complicated and it's this big kind of things are moving and it's hard to do in a static format, whereas with video, it's just great. So there's lots of different ways online to help students learn. So what I do in my class over here on the left is I give them links to all of the different places they can learn this information. So there's our textbook, which of course, because these books are free, because they're open resources, I can give them 2 different textbooks and I tell them, pick the one that you like better. I also give them links to other resources like Khan Academy. There's some interactive links, videos, and because all of these are available online, I can give them a bunch of different resources. So this is a pretty long list, which can be overwhelming to students, except that I also give them a very specific list of what they need to learn. So on the right side is a sample of the really granular details I give them about what they're supposed to be learning. And what I tell them is, it's not about learning what chapter 3 says, it's about being able to answer questions. Because that's really what I want them to get out of the course, and I teach general education. But when they're out in the world, when they have some sort of biology-related question, I want them to think about how this course was designed and go, oh yeah, I can find this answer, and here's some places I can get these answers. So that's really been my focus, is to give students questions and then go find the answer rather than read the book and figure out what it says. And again, this is really only possible because of that these books are open and free. I've asked students for their input on if this is working for them, and 98% of my students love this strategy. I get a lot of gratitude for thank you for letting me find the resources that work best for me. I have about 1 or 2% of students that are a little overwhelmed by this, and so what I've changed is I've made it very clear that this first link, that's our textbook. So if you're used to the kind of linear class where you just read the one book, just read that first link, don't worry about anything else. And once I made that clear, that cleared up any questions. So overall, this has been really effective for students. This strategy really reminded me of this XKCD cartoon. So I'm going to give you a second to read it, and then I'll explain why it connects. So the reason this spoke to me for this presentation is a lot of times I feel like when students are confused by some topic, we tend to explain it again in the same way but better, right? Whereas really what they may need is a totally different type of explanation. So I encourage my students that, I've lectured to them and presented it in a way that makes sense to me. I encourage them to look at videos on YouTube that I've curated, because there's some questionable videos out there, but look at how other people present it, because I think that can help them really grasp the concept. So it's like trying to explain flowcharts to someone that doesn't understand flowcharts by giving them a flowchart, right? All right, so multiple means of action and expression. This is all about giving students the option of how they want to demonstrate what they've learned. So let me explain how I do this in my class. So this section is all about the different chemicals of life, and it's basically, we go through all of these chemicals, I explain what they are and what they look like, and then I group them. So these are all different sugars, these are all different parts of a nucleic acid. And so what I'm teaching them in this entire section, takes about a day and a half, is what each of these things are and how they connect together. So I used to give them multiple choice tests on how to identify if they've learned this. And one of my favorite questions was this one here, which is asking them to understand not just what each of these things is, but also how they connect. So this is a piece of that. This is a piece of that. But this is an example of that. And it was a great question. So whenever I did the statistical analyses, this one was fabulous. It worked perfectly as far as multiple choice analysis. But what was it really testing? I had at one point a student come in and say, but why are you dividing these words? How do you even divide words? And I realized they didn't even understand what the question was asking. So these little lines here, these slanty lines, it didn't mean anything to them. And so really what this question was assessing is, did they go to a high school that had SAT prep? Like, that's really all I was assessing, with a little bit of knowledge as well. But it wasn't getting at what I wanted. So what I do now is I give them a really broad assignment that says, show me that you understand what these are and how they're connected. And you can do it in any way you want. Early on in the semester, I give them examples of how they can do this. But later on, I just let them choose more freeform. And these are some of the answers I've gotten back from students. So up here in the upper right is a mind map. And so this student is showing connections and they're showing the definitions in each box. Here is more of a table format. So again, showing the definitions and the subsets of the larger set. Here, the student has chosen to divide those two parts of the assignment into the definitions on flashcards. And these can be either paper flashcards or online flashcards. And then they show connections in a different way, which is on a table. So in all of these cases, I can grade if the students understand it. It's actually a lot more fun to grade than the standard test. And what I found that's really exciting is this allows me to find misconceptions that I never saw before on tests. So students would make these really interesting links, which would open up the opportunity for me to ask the student, what did you actually mean by that? And then I'm starting to find areas where students are just confused that I didn't know about before, which has been really interesting. And of course, because there are so many different wonderful free resources online, I can give the students the options of how to create these answers. So in a face-to-face class, you could have them draw things on paper and so on, but I teach online. And so I wanted to provide them online resources. And there's a bunch of them that help you evaluate all different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. What I've done, just a quick plug for my own website, sorry. What I've done is I've pulled together a lot of these resources that I found helpful for my class, and I've put them on this website here, rula.weebly.com. And what I do is I actually link my students to this site, and I tell them, here's all the different ways you can make mind maps. Pick one that you like and go for it. And this is kind of gives them a menu, so it's not quite so open. Oops. So multiple means of engagement is all about giving students ways to connect to the information. And I think one of the easiest is, I have all these videos in my course. What I ask students to do is rate those videos. So there's all sorts of rating apps you can find online. And what I ask is, tell me why you liked it or not, and give it a score from 1 to 10. And this really helps students get invested in the material, because they're the ones that they're empowered, right? They're no longer just these passive recipients. They actually have some control over the course content, Because what I also do is, when I get the feedback from students and the scores, is I move the videos that students like better up to the top. And so they can see how their input is changing the class. Another form of, and this is a type of open pedagogy, although loosely so, is an assignment I call community service. So I have students go to something like Yahoo Answers and type in a really complex question. And what they often find is answers that are not so great. So down here in the highlighted area is, the question is, what is global warming? And the best answer, notice, gold star, is basically don't worry about it. Like, which regardless if you agree or disagree, is not an answer to the question. And so what I have my students do is go in and answer these questions and provide links to the resources that they're using to answer the question. So community service. And I also encourage them to share the things that they've created in other ways. So I share Wikimedia Commons with them and allow them to upload their drawings, if that's how they've chosen to do it, into Wikimedia Commons. I don't require it. I feel like that would be unfair, but that is the option that I give them. If you're interested, there's this great website, but Wikimedia has an educational arm where they can help you actually create a class that's focused on adding to Wikipedia. I have a history instructor that is doing this with great success, and actually a librarian that's doing this in her class as well. So this is a really awesome way to get students to add to knowledge rather than just absorb it. And then in one of my classes, I'm having students build a textbook, which is kind of fun and interesting. There's a link here that, and I'll put the link to the slides in the chat in a minute, but this link here shows you how I've done that. So the idea is just to give students the opportunity to be empowered enough that they can learn that they're academics too, right? I mean, I teach at a community college where students just assume that they're not good enough, they're not smart enough, I don't belong here. And this really helps them see that no, you do. All you need to do is go find good resources, get good evidence, and then you too can provide answers for people. So that is kind of a quick walk through universal design for learning. And I will now take questions.
The chat so far has been pretty quiet, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you all. Feel free to type in the chat. And
I'm going to drop the link to the slides in the chat as soon as I can find it. Already not.
So a question that just popped up. I'd love to know how you assess student contributions through those communities. Is it through a reflection or some other way?
Excellent question. So I actually grade the answer they provide. So I ask them to link to their answer, and I look at, did they provide enough resources? So I tell them, you have to have 3 quality resources in your answer, and so I assess those. So previous to that, we've also talked about how do you know that a web resource is high quality.
Great. Another question from Genevieve. How do you grade a mind map versus flashcards? You probably addressed that, but any follow-up to that? Yeah,
it's a great question, because that's always a challenge, is how do you grade these very different things? And just like when I had the list of options for students and then the list of questions, what I'm grading is the information. So did they define everything correctly? And I can do that in a mind map, in a flashcards, right? So is the definition right? And are things grouped correctly? And again, that's easy to do, and regardless of the form that they use.
Excellent. And you got a thank you from April. From Nan, do the students have the criteria on the grading prior to these activities?
They do. And I have grading rubrics so that include things like, they've answered the questions and so on. But what I tell them, because the students have the same feeling, like, which way do you want me to do it so I get the full points? And I tell them that's not what I don't care how you do it. What I'm looking for is, did you get the information right? And that is the one and only criteria.
A question I have for you is, do you see, like, is there a clear favorite that students tend to be attracted to, or is it kind of like class personality, or is it always a lot of variety?
Actually, I didn't. That's a really great, I forgot to mention this. So students do tend to go to their kind of, their standard thing that they like. So if they're used to doing tables, I'll get a table every time. So about halfway through the semester, what I tell them to do is I give them an assignment, they do what they do, and then the next assignment is go back and do it again in a different way. Because if we just keep going to what we're comfortable with, we're not necessarily going to learn as much. And so by forcing them to do a different kind of assignment, it helps them learn. And that's been successful. They're not resentful that I'm making them do it again, or I pick a topic that's really hard. So yeah, it's good to get students out of their comfort zone in that way.
Nice. I forgot to ask, did you open up the chat, or do you want to?
I did. So I'm looking,
Okay.
and I didn't read all of
Yeah.
them, but
So they're getting longer, so
Yeah.
rather than have me interpret for you. So great questions coming through, or comments.
so there's a workshop next week regarding assessment design. I'm gonna have to look that one up. That sounds really interesting. Yeah, so these options are really good for assessments. And Trudy mentioned she's using WikiEDU. Yeah, that's been, I was surprised. That seemed like it would be higher level than what our intro GE students at a community college could manage, but they seem to love it in the history class. It was really successful. I was kind of surprised.
There was a question about, do students have the criteria on the grading prior to the activities?
They do. Yes. So I always tell them exactly what I'm looking for, and that's important. Just like with the giving them the list of videos and things, you have to tell them what you're looking for, or else the options seem overwhelming.
There was also a question about how they might scale into a larger class. So I don't know what size your classes are, Suzanne, but a typical community college biology class might be on the small side compared to a university.
Yeah, so my class is about 35, 40 students. So it is definitely on the small side. If you're teaching, 200 students, Scantron is really kind of the only thing that's reasonable for time. But it actually doesn't take that long to grade. I found that it's actually faster than if I do standard written assignments, because I'm less bored, right? Each assignment's a little different, and so my mind engages, and I can move through pretty quickly to see, did they define it right, or the things connected right? It doesn't take all that long compared to written assignments, obviously longer than Scantron. The biggest challenge for me, it's a good question. The biggest challenge has been curating resources, and because the list is so long, I tend to end up with broken links on a regular basis, especially to videos. And so it's been just kind of updating that. But the plus side is there are so many resources that when there's a broken link, I can usually just go in and delete it, and I don't have to look for something new. One way to kind of add to that is to have students bring in resources. So one of my assignments is find a resource that works and share it with me. That way I always have an input for the broken links. The most unusual, so many good assignments. That is actually my very favorite part, is grading the student assignments, and that's saying something, right? I had a student write a whole children's book focused around a turtle. I don't know why turtle, but for protein synthesis, and it was good. It explained the topic. It was a little it was interesting. It was a lot of fun to grade, but I have a lot of students do really neat things. Like I also teach human biology, and they have to name muscles and things. So I had a student take her kid and kind of label muscles, which was cool, because then they got to bring in their family, right? Like, now you're not studying instead of spending time with your child. You're doing both in a really wonderful way.
Well, we are right at time, and my time zone is 12:30, but I know that's not universally true. I really appreciate the conversation, and yeah, we will make sure to get the slide deck from you and provide contact information for you for people that can follow up as needed. And again, thank you for being part of this series. It's really great to have these examples.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone is interested, email me. I'm always open. I'm going to just quickly put it in the chat, and I'm sure you'll get it to folks, but I'm always open to talk about it.
And I realized one of the slides I was showing at the very end had your name misspelled, so I apologize about that.
Thank you, Suzanne. Even though I've heard this session before, I've learned new things today. So really, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Lovely. And thank you everybody for attending. Hope the rest of your Open Education Week is equally action-packed and exciting and inspiring. So
we have a philosophy talk at 3 p.m. Eastern today with CCCOER. So join us if you're interested.
Very good plug. And there's one more of these calls at the same time tomorrow as well. So
Awesome.
very good.
All right. See y'all at the
you,
next
everybody.
webinar.